Welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast, where empathy meets action in the world of leadership. Your host, Gino DeGregory, engages with innovators and seasoned professionals from diverse sectors, all demonstrating the power of leading with kindness. And now, your host, Gino DeGregory.
Welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Gino DeGregory, and today we have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Laura Gallaher, an organizational psychologist, best-selling author in transformational leadership. She's worked in many organizations known as NASA, Disney, Yahoo, and founding Gallaher Edge. So Dr. Laura, your journey is truly inspiring. Could you share with our audience a bit about your background and how you became so passionate about radical self-acceptance and leadership transformation?
Absolutely, Gino. So I studied psychology in college and I loved it immediately because I felt like every class I was learning something that I could apply to my life right away. And the applicability of psychology was so fascinating to me. And I ended up studying organizational psychology for graduate school because somebody told me that I could study anything I wanted in psychology, in org psych, as long as I added at work at the end of it. And so I felt really liberated in going into that field and just saying, okay, we spend a lot of our lives as human beings, especially in this country, working. Mm-hmm. We work all the time. So what are the dynamics that really impact how we feel at work and ultimately how we show up? So I was studying industrial organizational psychology at the University of Central Florida here in Orlando, Florida. I still live here. And there was an opportunity to go work with NASA. So you may remember the Space Shuttle Columbia accident from 2003. So this was the accident where NASA lost the shuttle as it was returning through Earth's atmosphere. And what we came to know from the investigation is that there was a piece of foam that fell off the external tank and it hit the orbiter during the launch. So it was okay during the mission in low Earth orbit. But when it came time to return to the planet, the damage from the foam actually broke the heat shield. And so the shuttle was not able to survive coming back through the atmosphere, and NASA lost all the astronauts. But the investigation didn't just blame the foam. They said NASA's culture was to blame. And so I don't know what comes to mind for you, but a lot of people think, oh gosh, their culture was to blame. They must have had really unkind leaders, overbearing managers, people that yell and scream, people that are disengaged. And that wasn't true at all. I mean, for the most part, NASA was a wonderful place to work. Mm-hmm. In fact, it had just been rated the #1 place to work in the federal government just a couple months before the accident. And so it raised really important questions about what is culture? Because it's so much more than just, do people like working here? And are people committed to the mission? Because NASA had that in spades. People at NASA love their work. They're so dedicated to the mission. I worked there for almost 8 years, and I never met a single soul that didn't care deeply about the lives of the astronauts. So it invited really important questions to help us understand that organizations are these complex adaptive systems. And there are so many invisible forces that are affecting the way that humans think, feel, and behave inside companies. And so I was able to work there at NASA for, like I said, almost 8 years, really helping to transform culture and teach leaders how to create psychological safety so that people can raise concerns even when it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to do so. So I did that. I got to work with Disney for a little while, and I started my own company, Gallaher Edge, about 12 years ago. And I bring a lot of the same kind of ideas that we were working with NASA on now to all kinds of different industries.
Beautiful. Congratulations on all success. I mean, there's some great stories that I'm sure we'll unpack here in our conversation. But thanks again for joining us. The first question that I love asking my guests here is, what does being a kind leader mean to you?
To me, being a kind leader means embodied authenticity. So being connected enough with yourself that you're able to meaningfully connect with other people. And I love the concept, too, that Dr. Brené Brown talks about, which is clear is kind. So while some people might mistake kindness as sugarcoating or beating around the bush or withholding feedback because somebody might feel negative emotions as a result. I don't think that that's what kindness really means. I think that kind leaders are willing and able to have really difficult conversations, but they do it with a lot of heart.
That's key right there. The heart, right? It's
Yes. Yep.
it's the caring, right, that I've seen in the way people describe, people describe kind leader in their own way, but at the end of the day, it comes back to that caring, that love, that support, right? That structure that they
Yes.
put in as they're navigating through the different, challenges, right? Because there's always
Absolutely.
challenges, right?
And to be able to lead with love and have that be front and center in conversations, from my lens, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, Gino. Leaders have to have enough self-love to do that. And, you asked me about radical self-acceptance because that's a huge part of the work that we do, whether it's in an organizational setting or I'm just working with a high achiever who wants to stop just improving themselves, but start accepting themselves. That radical self-acceptance is what enables leaders to show up with incredible kindness, even through some of the most difficult situations and conversations. Radical self-acceptance enables somebody to embody empathy and compassion, even if they are firing somebody, right, or laying people off. They are okay enough to sit with their own emotions and feel some of the discomfort that the other person sitting across from them is feeling and stay present. They don't have defense mechanisms that are popping up and inhibiting the communication. They're able to just sit in it. And so that radical self-acceptance to me is absolutely essential for kindness.
Yeah, that's interesting. You definitely love to talk a little bit more about that, just so I understand and maybe expand a little bit with our guests too. So, we talk about love. We use that word in there right just now, right, to get to this conversation, right? And I think kind starts with yourself, right?
Yes.
Are you kind to yourself?
Yes.
Before, it's like, this is a story that I always tell folks too. It's like if you're in an airplane and something happens and the mask comes out, you got to put that mask on yourself first before you take care of anybody else. Because if you don't, that's it for you.
Absolutely true. Yeah. And I love that you're bringing in that metaphor, right? The put your own oxygen mask on before assisting others, because otherwise you are trying to pour from an empty cup. And what you're actually doing isn't even kindness at that point. It's actually people pleasing. So at that point, if you're not taking care of yourself well enough to actually support other people, you're actually working to manage how other people perceive you rather than truly acting from a place of kindness. So totally agree. Have to be kind to yourself first.
And that brings up the whole genuine, right? You speak from the heart, right? And it's hard in the business. You think in the business, suits, ties, very professional. What's love got to do with anything in that world? Right? It's like, we're just here to do, or even on the government side, we do a lot of government work. And it's like, you talk about NASA, like it's the mission, right? We got to support the mission. I don't care about your feelings or anything like that. It's like, we got to take care of, like, I'm not saying everybody's saying that, but I'm just saying that's the perception, right?
Yeah. It's pretty common. I think it's common still. I mean, when I come into organizations and I am doing the kind of work that I do, where we literally invite people to slow down enough to feel the emotions and the feelings they've actually worked so hard to suppress. Almost every workshop, somebody brings up the like, I feel like I've been told to not do this at work. It's so common still. And I think that idea that emotions or love, feelings don't belong in business, that shows me that there is a fundamental misunderstanding of human beings out there. We are extremely emotional creatures as human beings. We actually cannot make any decisions if we don't allow ourselves to feel emotions. So the emotions are often there just running in the background, and we're not aware of how the emotions are driving us, but they are driving us in every single decision that we make.
Wow. That's true.
Yeah. It's emotion that makes us decide what is the mission. It's emotion that leads us to actually care if the mission succeeds. It's emotion that leads us to feel a certain way about ourselves that either enhances our performance or detracts from our performance. It's emotion that makes us want to help other people at work or avoid them at work. Like, emotions are everywhere.
Right.
And so trying to pretend they're not there or saying there's no place in business for emotion is, I think, one of the biggest mistakes any leader can make.
Absolutely. And I think I would use the word fear, which is another emotion, right? Of it's is that judgment, right? Well, what if
Yes.
if I say something and I'm going to be judged because I'm bringing my emotions, or if I do bring my emotions and nobody does anything about it,
Yeah.
that's another. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
oops,
How will I feel? How will I feel if they ignore me? I don't want to feel ignored. How about I just
right?
don't bring it up? I just won't say anything. And I love that you're using this example, Gino, because I can tie it back to what we learned about how things were happening at NASA with the Columbia accident. So I mentioned the foam had hit the orbiter, and there were 3 different teams across the agency that were aware of this. They called it a foam strike. The
Yeah,
foam struck the orbiter. They were aware of it. None of them, based on the video footage they had a really good idea of exactly where it hit and how badly the orbiter was damaged. And so there were 3 different requests made to get imagery. They wanted to reposition satellites to see if they could get better imagery of the orbiter, Columbia, while it was orbiting the Earth. And it was shut down every time.
wow,
And part of the reason it was shut down is because a higher governing body had said that foam strikes are not something we're going to worry about during the mission.
wow,
A lot of people don't realize that foam strikes had actually been happening for years and years.
hmm
And it had never previously posed a safety risk to the astronauts. And so they were leaning on the fact that, hey, we've said that we don't have to worry about this. Now, in this case, these people were worried beyond that. They were like, listen, I know that in the past it hit on the underbelly of the orbiter where it's stronger tiles, but here we're not so sure. Can we just check?
right,
But if you think, Gino, about, like you talked about judgment, people being afraid of judgment, that was so prevalent because at NASA, to be an engineer and to stand up in a room with multiple levels of leadership above you and say, I know that a higher governing body has already said this is not an issue for us to worry about.
hmm
And I know that we don't have any real data to back up the concern. By the way, there were literally walls painted at NASA that said, in God we trust, all others must bring data.
oh wow,
Right. So to be like, I'm an engineer and I don't have data,
yeah,
but I just have a gut feeling that
right,
it might be really, really bad. And oh, by the way, I know that we might discover a problem and we have no idea how to solve it yet.
wow,
The intense vulnerability that's required
yeah,
for an engineer to do that and the fear of judgment was huge.
right,
The fear of being judged because what if they're wrong? Now
right,
they're chicken little.
yeah,
And so what happens for us as human beings is we might fear that judgment, but then we often actually rationalize it to ourselves. We deceive ourselves into thinking it's not that I'm afraid of judgment and that's why I don't speak up. I don't speak up because I don't know if it's that important, or I don't speak up because it won't matter anyway,
mhm,
or I don't speak up because I think it's going to be fine. Like we will rationalize our own behavior to make ourselves feel better in a moment,
right.
even if the choices we're making are, in this case, life and death.
Wow. Amazing story there. And you spot on. It's like that is the biggest, the judgment and the fear of the judgment and what's going to happen with my career,
Yeah,
with my life or whatever. I mean, being stream here, but how do we build that? I mean, I think that's something that you are expert in, but I'm curious, because I'm looking at organizations. I do work in the government, supporting the government, and there's so many moving parts, right?
there are. Yeah,
How, speaking to our audience here, how can themselves as individuals kind of help their organization, right?
yeah.
Or help some way, or maybe starts with themselves, but what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. How can you create psychological safety? Right.
Yeah.
So I'd love to answer that by starting with a story from my experience at NASA, which is not about Columbia, but
Okay.
I had been working at NASA for a couple of years. And I think I had built a pretty good reputation at that point. I was working internally with, we called them directors of the different directorates. Engineering primarily is who I was working with. I was also working with IT and the technology departments. And I did a 360. And I had moved into a leadership role within my own organization, which we were housed in HR at the time. And I mostly got pretty positive feedback. But there was this one section where there were a couple people that were on my team, my org development team, that felt that I would sometimes bully them intellectually. Oh my gosh. Gino, I was horrified when I saw that feedback. And it was actually like they didn't write that in. It was like one of the ineffective ways to like influence or something. And a couple people had been like, oh, sometimes. And I was so devastated. I felt like I was just punched in the stomach. And I remember looking at the page, and I don't know what my face looked like, but I was actually meeting with one of the coaches later. And this was a strange response, but she was like, oh my God, I saw your face when you were reading. That was hilarious.
Oh, man.
I'm like, wow, look, I'm a little insensitive. I don't know why it was hilarious to you, but clearly I was like going through it. And I tell this story because I had been working with leaders to help them cultivate psychological safety on their teams. And I myself was not creating the level of psychological safety on my team to the degree that I wanted. And so it just struck me. It's not enough to know. It's not enough to just know the concept. And it's not enough to sort of know the psychological mechanisms of how all this works. Because as human beings, we're all self-deceived. Because I can promise you, Gino, at no point in time was I like, you know what I want to do right now? Let me just bully them intellectually and then they'll just agree with me. Like there was not a conscious choice.
Right.
But I had some of my own insecurities that were under the surface that would lead me to sometimes in conversations become a little bit too, quote, passionate or a little bit too opinionated because I felt so strongly. And so while I can rationalize in my mind why I was making those choices and why I was showing up the way that I was, the impact that I was having is not at all what I wanted. And so that was a really big, painful light bulb moment for me to recognize that if I don't look at the insecurities that I have that are driving my behavior, I will continue to get in my own way and I will detract from psychological safety because it's actually my self-judgment that creates the fear of judgment in other people.
That's huge.
So it's my self-acceptance that creates psychological safety amongst the team.
Wow. That's why you got to start within, right?
Always.
Because
always.
I love the story because, I'm a passionate person. I'm driving and leading teams and sometimes I may say something from my perspective may come across as we're doing X, Y, and Z or whatever, right? And it has some passion behind it. And it may not be like, oh no, okay. Like I'm not going to judge it. I'm not going to push back. I'm not going to question it because the leader now said we have to do X, Y, and Z.
Exactly.
And to me, it's like, hey, even though I presented it in a tone like this is where we're going, nobody's going to question it. Nobody's going to ask, you know what I mean? But so the way I now change it, here's what I'm thinking. If you guys see anything that I'm missing, please let me know.
Yes.
Because I don't have all the answers, but this is my gut feeling. This is based on data that I put, but this is where we need to go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I leave a little the door
Absolutely.
just to provide that platform. Right?
I love that. That's such an important awareness to have because the role that you hold will change what signals they think are being sent just because of the position that you hold. So for the leaders who are listening, keeping that in mind is so useful. I love that. I'll give a couple other suggestions too for leaders. One would be to specifically say, I realize that I'm the leader here of the team. I really, for the sake of the conversation, I want to take off the leader hat right now. And I just want to put on team member hat and I just want to brainstorm with you all. So if you can do your best to not see me in that role, but I'm just sort of part of this and I want to hear what everybody else thinks. And my opinion in this conversation doesn't have any more weight than anybody else's. Now, to some degree, some people are still going to be like, okay, but you're still the boss.
Right.
Right? That's not going to go away completely. But it does, like you said, it keeps that door open for them to go, okay, I really think that she is looking for input. She wants to know what we think. She's not asserting this to say final decision. The other thing that leaders can do, which is very structured, is I could, as a leader, put out, hey, so looking at option A and B, right now I'm really thinking option A is probably going to be the best path to go. But I would actually love for each of you to write down 3 reasons why you think path A is not the best. And now everybody's going, oh, okay, that's what she wants us to do. Yeah. So now I have decreased the fear in the room that I'm going to be upset that they're pointing out reasons why it might not work because I'm asking for it.
Yeah.
And of course, hearing that feedback, it might help me realize that maybe path A or option A isn't the way I want to go.
Right.
Just great. So happy we know that. Or maybe it is, and we can actually strengthen that path because we've identified some of the potential weaknesses in it.
Right.
And so you can bring in some structure and ask people to specifically argue against a certain perspective. And when you do that repeatedly, you can stop relying on the structure of it, and people will just start engaging in more dissenting opinion expression naturally, which is what every leader really wants.
Right.
They want
Absolutely.
to believe people are being open with them.
Yeah. But it's hard, right? It's like you said, it's the title. But what I like, the examples that you're giving is you're not only leaving the door open, but you are giving permission, right? Like I think a permission for us to be think outside the box or move away from the structure, the hierarchy that's there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to go away completely, but I think it allows for a better collaboration, and
Absolutely.
that's what we truly want at the end of the day, is to better collaborate with our folks.
Yes.
To support the mission from a business perspective, to increase profit or provide better quality to our customers. There's so much you can really do as you start expanding that in your organization.
Oh, yeah. It's huge. I mean, it's not only leading to better decisions and then, like you're saying, better profit, but the people are going to feel more intrinsically engaged. Every leader that I work with wants the people on their team to have that intrinsic sense of motivation.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to feel like they have to hold up, a carrot or a stick to get them to do things. People talk about accountability all the time and go, why won't people be accountable? And that's a whole topic in and of itself. But I think that when a leader is really wanting their team to show up with intrinsic motivation, the team has to have a sense of ownership and empowerment. And they can't do that if they don't have that collaboration that you're talking about, Gino. They have to have that sense of leader wants to collaborate, wants their input, wants them to own it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I want to come back real quick as we got great conversations. I'm really enjoying Laura. The self-awareness. I want to bring that back just because that is tough. But I'm pretty self-aware on several things, but it hasn't come naturally to me, right? Like I really had to experience the world. But how do you go about not voices, but when you're hearing yourself talking to
self-talk,
talking to yourself about it feels like it's trying to protect you, but it's really trying to keep you from making any big decisions in your life. So how do you navigate through that?
Yeah, you're spot on, Gino. You're describing the psychological immune system.
Okay.
When we as human beings are self-deceived, which, spoiler alert, we are all self-deceived. I am self-deceived. I talk about self-awareness like literally every day because I'm a huge nerd about this stuff. I don't just talk about it at work. I talk about it in my life. And I have been doing this work for almost 20 years. I am still self-deceived. It is part of the human condition. So first, I just want to normalize the fact that we all have self-awareness gaps. Right. And that's not a reason to not do anything about it, because we can always make progress. We can always work to become more self-aware and less self-deceived. That is really the essence of the core work that we do. But like you said, it's trying to protect you. So if you're sitting in a meeting and you're thinking, gosh, I don't know if I fully agree with this. Maybe I should speak up and share my concern. And then the self-talk, that voice says, I don't know if you should do that. You might piss them off, right? Or, oh, I don't know if you should do that. What if they just ignore you? That's going to feel really bad. You don't want to feel really bad. Just don't say anything. If you don't say anything, then you don't have to face the fear of being ignored. Or maybe the self-talk is going, oh, I could speak up, but then they're just going to rip me a new one. They're going to tell me why I'm wrong and why I don't have a good foot to stand on for the self-talk is totally trying to keep me safe, but it's not life and death safety in that interpersonal conversation vast majority of the time. Right. What we're actually talking about is ego protection. So self-deception exists to protect the ego, which unfortunately gets in our way all the time.
Yeah.
So higher self-acceptance actually leads to higher self-awareness, because higher self-acceptance means I don't need my ego so much. Right. And so I actually let myself feel more of what's really going on for me, because I'm not going to judge myself. Right. If I'm not going to judge myself, I'm not worried about other people judging me. And so there's a really, really deep connection between self-acceptance and self-awareness. The psychological immune system does not need to kick in when my self-acceptance is high. And I would imagine, Gino, that you have had moments where you have very high self-acceptance. It could be specific people that you work with. And maybe, think back to like early in your career,
Right.
specific people where in their presence, you felt significant, you felt competent, you felt likable. And when you're with them, you're not afraid of them judging you. And so you're not afraid of judging you.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we can think about that versus maybe somebody else. You're like, I'm not going to say anything. I don't feel good about myself in this person's presence,
Right.
which usually translates to something like, I don't like you, is what we say.
Yeah.
But I always get to choose how I feel about myself. So instead of being at the whim of fear of judgment from other people and the psychological immune system popping up to protect me from that judgment, I can raise my own self-acceptance. I can choose to feel better about myself, even with all my flaws and imperfections, which takes the psychological immune system down, drops the walls, and now my awareness of my entire experience increases, and I can show up in a much more conscious way.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautifully said. One thing that was popping up as I don't know if you heard this saying before, and speaking about awareness, is, especially with emotions, right? You hear people talking about, I'm anxious. That's just who I am, right? But the reality is, the minute you realize that you're not your feelings, your emotions, you're the awareness of your feelings and emotions.
Yes.
That shifted during COVID, and I was, really going into kind of deeper meditation. Took me a minute. I think that realized it's like, I am not those emotions or feelings. I'm the awareness. Now that I can be aware of those feelings, now I can start playing with it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You're in the observer seat, and it's a much more powerful place to be. And I'll offer 2 language things to your listeners that if they're not already aware of, they can bring in to drive home the point that you're making, Gino. So instead of I'm anxious, I notice. As soon as I say I notice, even if I'm saying I notice I'm feeling anxious, just by saying I notice, I am putting myself into that like, oh, I am the one that's aware of the feeling. I'm putting myself more in the observer seat. I'm noticing I'm feeling anxious. The second thing that you can do is to say, I notice part of me is feeling anxious. Because the truth is, probably part of you is feeling other emotions too.
Right.
And maybe it's other negative emotions, but maybe it's other positive emotions.
Right.
Maybe you're simultaneously feeling anxious and also a bit of relief. Maybe you're feeling anxious and also a little bit of excitement.
Right.
And so it puts you even more on that seat of like the observer. And it's like, oh, I am the one who is aware. What can I see from up here? If I sort of lift up and look down, what do I notice?
Yeah. Beautiful. I love it. Definitely going to use those nuggets. I'll put them in the show notes and stuff like that. So thank you. I mean, I know we've been having some great conversations. A few more questions that I want to ask before we start kind of wrapping it up here. I'm big on the vision of leadership, right? We're talking about kind leadership, and where do you see the role of, especially what we're talking about, self-awareness and empathy evolving in leadership over the next decade?
I think it's going to become more and more essential. And less of something that's seen as a nice to have. And I think pragmatically, there are so many examples of leaders in the past who have built incredible followings in the most organic ways. Martin Luther King Jr., his vision was compelling. And it was absolutely embodied with empathy, right? And the feeling for others and what they were going through. And he's just one example, but there are so many. And so I think moving forward, any leader who is not focused on growing their self-awareness and not focused on leading with kindness and empathy is going to find that people will not choose to follow them. And you are not a leader if people are not choosing to follow you. So I think it's going to become an essential piece that every organization recognizes and works to cultivate in the leaders that they're growing and grooming, because that's the essence of connection.
Right.
If a leader can't connect with the people who are following them, they will never maximize their impact as that force multiplier.
Yeah. Connection is huge. It's huge. If you're not really listening and really truly listening and paying attention to make that connection, you're going to lose people, right? In your organization.
Totally. And they're going to feel it.
Yeah.
And it means connecting with yourself too. So you have to be able to connect with yourself in order to connect with somebody else, because you got to be willing to stay in the feeling of whatever's coming up. People do get emotional at work.
Yeah.
And they get emotional. The leaders listening to this, Gino, I know that y'all have people on your team who you would probably label as too emotional. They get emotional for things that you're like, why are you getting emotional about this? Like, this is crazy. Or maybe you avoid having a difficult conversation because you're like, they're going to get emotional.
Yeah.
The more that you as a leader feel confident in your ability to sit in whatever emotions come up for you based on the emotions coming up for somebody else, which means connected to yourself, the more you can connect with them.
Yeah.
And that connection with them is actually going to help them move through their emotional reaction faster.
Yeah.
So they can get back to being really productive, and they're going to feel an increased loyalty to you and a devotion and a dedication to wanting to complete the mission and help support you looking good in your role.
Beautiful. I got chills when you said that.
Oh, good.
Awesome. Before, so I have a kind of rapid questions here for you for leadership insight. Like one book every leader should read.
The Untethered Soul by Michael
Oh,
Singer.
wow.
Talks a lot about that seat of observer.
Yep.
Yes.
I've listened to that book 3 times.
Yeah, I listened to it repeatedly too. I love it.
Great. It's allowing, right? And basically,
Yes.
it's allowing and really enjoying the journey, right?
Yes.
So very good book. Thank you.
Mhm.
Your go-to activity for stress relief.
Dancing.
Okay. Love it.
I would host dance parties when I was working out of my condo with my assistant. If we were feeling a little bit like, we would just put on one song and just let ourselves dance for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It's a good time.
It gets you into that frequency, right? It's really about the energy, right? Shifting
Totally.
that energy into like,
Yeah, it changes the vibe.
Yep.
Completely.
It absolutely does.
Mhm.
I'm from Peru, so I listen to some salsa music when I really want to get into that.
Oh, so good.
A leadership mantra or quote you live by.
Listen like it's not about you.
Listen like it's not about you. Ooh, I like it.
Listening is a leadership superpower. And defensive listening is unfortunately all too common.
Mhm.
A tendency to listen and subconsciously make part of what they're saying about you such that you want to interrupt them, tell them that they're wrong, that they shouldn't feel that way, assume that the magic piece of information that you have is going to solve whatever's going on. All of these things get in the way of truly listening and truly understanding. So it's still an area for me, Gino, that I work on every day is listening more effectively. I listen very well with my clients because whatever they're speaking about is usually not about me.
Right.
When my team is speaking, my brain is much more likely to personalize what they're saying. And so I work every day as a leader to listen like it's not about me, to listen internally to my team members without taking anything they're saying personally and without trying to show them that they're wrong and I'm right. Because it feels so good to be right,
Yeah,
but I'm often wrong, even when I think I'm right. And it's not even the point. The point is listen like it's not about you is so kind. Yeah. And again, it comes back to that ability to connect.
Beautiful, Laura. All right. I do have one more question just to reflect here. If you could have coffee with anyone alive or from the past, who would it be and why?
Jim Carrey.
Okay.
So I was a fan when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. He blew up in the mid-90s when I was a preteen. And, he was so silly and funny and goofy. And I actually studied humor for my doctoral dissertation. So I have a very healthy appreciation for humor and the role that it plays in our lives. And over the last 3 decades, this man has become so, I don't know if I want to say enlightened. I don't know if he's quite there yet, but he's so conscious and he's so spiritual. And one of his quotes that I love is he says, "I wish everybody could get rich and famous so that they would realize that it's not the answer."
Wow.
And I think it's so profound. I think it's way more profound than the majority of the world's population can really comprehend. And I'm actually determined to sit down and have coffee or dinner with him at some point. Not sure exactly how that's going to happen, but my intention is set. Yeah. And I believe that it will happen.
It already happened.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing there. All right. So where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work?
I would actually love to invite your listeners, if they want to learn more about their own self-acceptance, because we talked about radical self-acceptance, we have a free quiz that they can take. And so if you just want to go to selfacceptancequiz.com, it takes about 3 or 4 minutes to fill out, and then you're going to immediately get a report. And what you're going to see is, where do you fall on the spectrum of not just self-acceptance, but also self-improvement. You might be somebody that's high on self-improvement, but low on self-acceptance, kind of perfectionist tendencies. I assume a lot of your listeners fall into that category because most of my clients do. But you can see where you fall, and then you'll receive several coaching emails as a follow-up based on your results to help you think about how can you increase your self-acceptance and how will that have an impact on your life. So that's selfacceptancequiz.com. And then, of course, we'll be connected via email. Okay. And your listeners can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm on there as Dr. Laura Gallaher. I like to post quite a bit, and I would love any interaction, or if people have questions, I would love to connect.
Awesome. We'll put all those in the show notes too, so people can reach out. I'll probably take that quiz too. I'll let you know.
Yes, please do.
Any final message you'd like to leave with our audience today?
I would just say that there is no amount of self-improvement that will ever make up for a lack of self-acceptance. So give it some attention and some love. Most people focus way too much on self-improvement and don't pay enough attention to how they can truly practice more acceptance of self.
Oh my gosh, so many good nuggets here. Wisdom. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experiences with us today. I mean, I really appreciate and really enjoyed this conversation. And, and to our audience, thank you for listening to the Kind Leader podcast, and remember, be kind, bring value, rise together.